Hi, everyone, and welcome to our live stream with the Quad Cities Community Foundation. I'm Kelly Thompson, Vice President of Grantmaking and Community Initiatives. And we're here today to talk about and really celebrate the last 15 months of work that's been possible through the work of many partners and with the support of the Quad Cities Disaster Recovery Fund. You may have seen a report come out recently from us this week on the use of that fund and the way that it was possible because of the many donors who contributed to it. And we're here today to talk with a couple of those partners. We hate to kind of look back at those days, right? Those early days, but we all kind of have that moment when we realized, oh, something's going on and we need to do something. And one of those decision points at the Community Foundation was activating the Quad Cities Disaster Recovery Fund. We had funding partners quickly step up from Regional Development Authority and United Way to join our board in bringing $100,000 apiece to that fund to get it started. And then we had countless other people, businesses, funders join in and make it possible for, in total, $1.8 million to come into that fund. And as of last month, $1.8 million has gone out of that fund into the community. And so we've wrapped up granting from it. And we're here to talk about what's been done and also what we're looking to in the future. So let my guests introduce each other. Maybe just introduce yourself. That might be a little bit too hard. Dave Donovan, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thank you, Kelly, and thanks for having me today. My name is Dave Donovan. I'm the director of the Scott County Emergency Management Agency and the Scott Emergency Communications Center. So I've been with Scott County government for over 30 years in several different roles. I live in LeClaire with my wife, Mary, and have two adult children, Ben and Alexandra.
Thanks, Dave. And Cecilia, how about you?
I am Cecilia Bailey, and I'm the Executive Director of the Quad Cities Open Work here in the area. And we work with about 82 organizations in the Health and Human Service field to coordinate and collaborate services looking at systematic issues to help with the community initiatives.
Awesome. So you both have been involved throughout this disaster and other previous disasters, and particularly including the 2019 flood. Like I said, we've all got those kind of moments from when we know something needs to happen. So at the beginning of the conversation, I talked a little bit about those early days and the conversations we had at the Community Foundation to activate that fund. And I'm wondering if the two of you might be willing to take us back to the early days for you. What was it like for you, for your work, for your organization? And maybe what were the major concerns you had for your community when that all started going down? And Dave, I'll start with you.
Okay. Oh, as you said, in early 2020, we were still reeling and still recovering from the record flooding of 2019. So we were, just catching our breath. We still had, open FEMA declarations and that, and we still were working with partners to try to minimize or overcome the impacts from that previous year. So, and we started hearing about this, pandemic, this disease, and we started meeting and we were talking to the Scott County Health Department, and we were hoping, we had been through the H1N1 flu situation several years prior. Dr. Katz, the local epidemiologist and medical director for the health department, was warning us, though, that this could be different. And, it started raising some red flags. We planned for public health emergencies, but we, and I for sure, didn't really have a clear picture of what was to come. We certainly couldn't have predicted it. Our concerns really were for the healthcare system. That's what we were hearing, that it could overwhelm the healthcare system, having access to testing. We didn't know what a vaccine might look like. We were hearing, I didn't have a real good picture of how long it takes to develop a vaccine, but that was starting to emerge. And then sort of
We've all become experts in that over the last months.
Right, yeah. And then sort of the politics of it all. And this whole thing became a political battleground very early on.
Mm.
And, quite frankly, that hindered us. It was very unexpected by me. I'd never witnessed something to that extent. It was really disappointing because, for us, it wasn't an R or a D thing. And the rhetoric and the sensationalism on both sides, and the misinformation was just really counterproductive. And in my mind, it was sort of inappropriate. So it was sort of tough, but there was a lot of unknowns at that point.
Yeah, a lot of concerns, and you've touched on this kind of follow-up question for me already. But you mentioned some people and organizations that you knew you needed to collaborate with. Right away. So our health departments, our hospital systems. What were a couple of others that became partners pretty quick?
We drew EMS, emergency medical services, into it. So Medic EMS was our primary, but hospitals. Fortunately, we had been engaged fairly closely with a lot of our healthcare partners, nursing homes and that early on, and that was a godsend for us because our impacts maybe were a little bit less severe in our nursing homes and that. But we also were starting to talk to government administration, elected officials, the business community, and then the community at large. And sort of by happenstance, both groups inadvertently were scheduled to be in the same place at the same time. It was supposed to be two separate meetings, but it happened, and the City COVID-19 Coalition was born. And that group has just been awesome, sharing information and working together to keep the community safe and informed throughout this last 18 months.
Yeah. So Cecilia, same question to you. In those early days, what was that like for you, for your work at Quad Cities Open Network or QCon? And what concerns did you have for our community? Uh-oh, did Cecilia freeze?
It looks like it.
Oh boy, well, we'll see if she can catch up. So sorry. But while we wait for that to catch up, let's go on, Dave, because I want to help people understand what your role was. So you're the emergency manager for Scott County. Well, that's my quick way of saying it. For anybody who doesn't know, what's that?
So each county in Iowa, and in Illinois for that matter, has an emergency manager, and their role is to plan for various disasters and emergencies that can impact. And we're not talking about doing the job of police or fire or EMS. It's the things that go above and beyond the normal day-to-day responses. And so planning for those floods and public health disasters as COVID-19 was, planning for what we would do if a tornado comes through and impacts our community, or our transportation systems are impacted, or there's a big cyber security attack, things like that. And so we have plans, but then really we're relationship builders, and we reach out, form those connections, try to make those connections while the sky is blue, like it is today, before things happen. So, not trying to do introductions in the middle of a disaster, and knowing what we're going to do, who's going to come to the table, and how we're going to approach things, and who's responsible for different aspects of an emergency.
Yeah, it makes me feel good just as a resident of the Quad Cities to know that there are people whose full-time job this is to make sure that we're ready as best we can to respond when those kind of inevitable disasters strike of all these different kinds. So while we wait to see if we can get Cecilia back, we'll just continue on, and I can share a little bit about what I know about the work that Quad City Open Network and so many others did. Oh, Cecilia, you're back. Hey, look at us rolling with it. Thank you for rejoining us. I'll just come back and ask you then, those early days, right? When things started to go down, what was that like for you and your work at Quad Cities Open Network, and what concerns did you have for our community?
Sure. So early on, Quad Cities Open Network was just really beginning the onboarding of our information and referral system. So one of the things that we had been working to do last year or so was kind of getting a web-based platform together that would allow agencies to talk back and forth, streamlined and on one platform. So really, it was quite interesting to have a pandemic of sorts that would happen that would need agencies to be able to connect and contact one another through a secure system. So for us, it was about renewing our onboarding process and recognizing really early on that we needed to get as many agencies onboarded into that system as possible so they could continue to do their work. But as well as we had just finished negotiations and taken on another community initiative that's been in existence for a very long time in the Quad Cities area, which is the Women's Emergency Assistance Program. And so we did take on that initiative in February of 2019, just as COVID was hitting, which is a fund that sits in the community that our partner agencies are able to tap into gaps that exists within the Quad Cities area. So what a great time that was to be taking on that initiative as COVID-19 was rolling out. So it worked out well that those programs and initiatives were in existence already, though we did have to quickly learn to adapt and trying to get everybody on the same page and look at new program options like that.
Yeah, you play that critical role of, I mean, this is what I think we all found during the pandemic, and as it continues, it's not over. That we needed information, and people who needed to access help needed to be able to navigate that network. And there was the need for crisis financial assistance, right? Of people hit by this in a lot of different ways, economically, socially, educationally. And so you had both of those things lining up right at that time to be ramping up anyways, and you got the chance to ramp them up fast.
We did. So it was a unique experience, certainly rewarding. The concerns that we had, or that I had for the community, were specifically related to the vulnerable population. Knowing that is that is kind of the work that the SEAT program, work to fulfill those gap needs in any case, but watching potentially a divide happen in that with those populations. So what we knew we needed to do was connect with those partners initially, those folks those targeted populations, to get them onboarded to get in the system and access to those emergency dollars. Overall, my concern was that the community would be frustrated and feel disconnected. And once we're in a frustrated and disconnected space, our mind goes elsewhere, and we're not able to refocus and recenter and focus on fixing the problem.
Yeah, and you've talked about this as well. Some of those organizations that you partnered with, Quad Cities Open Network has been in one form or another for the past several years part of Disaster Ready Quad Cities, right? And so just as on Dave's side, there's this government network preparing for and being able to respond to disasters and helping our community recover. Disaster Ready Quad Cities is a group that includes government, but also nonprofit, business, faith groups, anything that you can name it, that again pulls in our community roles in doing this. And so you had experienced providing out additional financial crisis assistance to people affected by flood. And so we were ready, although maybe didn't realize the scope for you to do that as well, with funds that came through the Quad Cities Disaster Recovery Fund, being able to connect those to all those people. So let's talk about that. Quad Cities Open Network was really critical in that outreach and collaboration amongst organizations and helping people, access that crisis financial assistance, especially as we waited for all the different larger sources that came through, right, from state and federal. So how did Quad Cities Open Network use those grants to support people and families? What's it like for people to get that assistance?
Sure. So Quad Cities Open Network itself, again, acts as a conduit. So we are working through those member agencies to help them connect to the financial part of the work so that they can focus on the person as a whole. So we have member agencies, again, 81, 82, that tap in to the SEEP program. And what they do is when it makes it, there's no wrong door for a client. So when they interface with any of our partner agencies, they are doing intakes, they're figuring out what the issues are, and those case managers are working diligently to make sure that they can get their needs met. And once those needs, they cannot see a programmatic way to do that in the community, then they are able then to tap into our emergency. It's very flexible, and it allows the client and the case manager to determine what the best use of those funds are. So whether it's a car repair, utility, rent, whatever the case may be, we found some very weird instances with COVID-19 where folks were, trying to pay their main bill, and so we saw like insurance payments, things that need to be made. So really, the way that Quad Cities Open Network work is those member agencies are doing that work, and then we are that conduit that allows them to talk to one another on a streamlined, more effectively, as well as access those dollars. So as far as the impact that our partners were able to make, I can give you an example. When we first took on SEEP, about $150,000 a year would go in for gap services through those partners. We had about 40 agencies that would tap in regularly for those funds. In the last 18 months, that would serve about 500 families, or about 50 people, if we estimate it out. Through COVID-19, we have seen about $350,000 back into the community from the Quad Cities Network to our member agencies, servicing about 4,500 people.
Wow.
So it was quite an increase and quite special to watch, and an honor to watch our agencies work and do the good work that they do every day, but be able to respond and help folks who needed that help.
Yeah, and you're on here as just one of, I think, 80 some grantees that came out, that received some kind of grants from the Quad Cities Disaster Recovery Fund. But you're a particularly special one because so many individual people needed, help, needed financial help, and Quad Cities Open Network is the venue through which those dollars that need to go directly to help people with those crisis financial needs that you identified. That's the way that we've set up to do it, and that's the way that you carried it out. So Dave, you didn't receive grants, right? Mm-hmm. But you did through the COVID Coalition and through all of this bi-state collaboration that was coordinated over the last 15 months. You did help identify some of those needs to be met with dollars from the fund. From your point of view, what did it mean to have these gifts to call on as we all worked together?
Well, Kelly, I think the funds from the Disaster Recovery Fund were just so very, very important throughout the pandemic. Having that financial safety net from that fund there allowed EMA, public health, and others to really focus more on responding to the public health crisis and spend less time or less worry, I guess, worrying about the peripheral social economic impacts from the pandemic. As we all know, it was this thing turned into a monster, and the impacts were great, but it just took so much effort and time to make sure we were getting information out in that. So it really allowed my group and the public health department to focus more on the response side of it and a little less on the social and economic impacts. We didn't have to worry about, getting a call from a nonprofit that was closing their doors or discontinuing a program that we were going to have to try to figure something out, on the fly. I mean, we had issues, we had to reinvent sheltering and homeless programs because of the pandemic and social distancing. But there were dollars that were flowing in, whether it's from the Disaster Recovery Fund or from other sources that were helping with that. And I think those dollars help those programs, those organizations adapt their service delivery models. Many of your grants provided, funds so that they could either accommodate social distancing or put up, barriers so that they can continue to provide and still, help to address those unmet needs. So it shored up basic needs, in the community: the food, the shelter, healthcare, emotional, mental health, and
Educational.
Education, correct? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, from my perspective, from an emergency management perspective, it was a godsend, quite honestly.
Yeah, and we're only able, I think about it regularly, we were only able to do this because of gifts from donors all over the Quad Cities and some beyond, although many people had to address their own communities, and it was these local flexible dollars employed in this collaborative way where we're all sharing information and trying to plan together how we respond, to use those, quickly. We may not have had as much money as comes in eventually from federal sources and whatnot, but we could go quickly. We can work collaboratively. We can be flexible, and we can fill in those gaps as best we could. Cecilia, did you see that similarly, either with QCon or with your many member agencies, about what it meant to have those gifts at hand?
Yes, we did. So, just the gifts in general and the way that they were being deployed, we did see agencies being able, as Dave said, to adopt their service model. Whether it was that they could then offer, things virtually or from a distance or what have you, whether it was, supplies that they needed, whatever the case may be, agencies were able to adapt in that way. And then agencies specifically, again, for direct services, were able to adapt. Maybe we interfaced with some of our member agencies that we had never utilized, SEEK before. They used QCon in a different way. So whether it was, we do many different collaborations. So whatever other collaboration that we had always interfaced with that agency, we had never seen them tap into SEEK dollars before. But as they were interfacing with clients that maybe before they would have worked with another agency to fulfill that need, that agency's dollars may not have been here yet. They were federal or state dollars. So then we were seeing those agencies then tap back in to take care of those needs. So yes, it allowed for a lot of adaptive ability, a lot of flexibility, and to really keep the service flow going to address needs of our community.
Yeah, I think of all these organizations as like the critical part of the critical infrastructure of our community, right? Of helping people access education or health or mental health care, the support of their basic needs, like having a home, having food to eat. And one of the things you said that I thought really picked up on something Dave said earlier, it may even have been when you were transitioning in and out, but I think it's so important, is that you already had a different way maybe of connecting with and collaborating with some of these organizations, right? You had those relationships, that trust beforehand. And so while they may not have, we can't in any disaster predict exactly what we'll need to do, and we'll need to be able to change. Having those relationships, those connections of working together beforehand really allows us to get going faster when we run into whatever it is that we'll run into next. Could each of you maybe share the story of a positive outcome from the work you were engaged with, you've been engaged with and are still engaged with over the past 15 months? Anybody got a positive outcome or a story to share?
So I'll share an individual story. I find those very powerful. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we did was we reached out to our member agencies as we were watching. I think a lot of times we focus on quantitative data, right? So sure. The number served, all those things. So one of the things that we tried to do with QCon is look at qualitative data to adjust our programs according to what we were seeing. So we would ask our agencies what they were seeing, why people weren't able to make their bills and things like that. And so what we began to see were a multitude where people maybe were tapping into services and not just looking for rent, but looking to pay a part of their rent, part of their insurance, part of something just to try and keep themselves afloat. And so how we responded was to A, raise the ceiling, B, go after more dollars, and then to C, to offer some sort of what we considered nominal, but some gift cards that would we would give to anyone who applied through our assistance that would not impact their eligibility and ability to get dollars in the future. And so while that was something that we thought was appropriate and the agencies responded to well, we didn't realize what that meant until we got the call, right? So we got several calls, but one woman in particular, I will never forget, when we picked up the phone, said the letter that just said that you cared and that $25 gift card meant everything to me. She said we were looking to be homeless, and our agency interfaced with us and were able to tap into your dollars to keep us at our house, but to know that the agencies are going the extra mile and know that we need other things. And so you're just willing to do that without us asking means everything. And so to me, who doesn't do direct service work so much anymore and focus on the system, reminded me of why I got started in it.
Yeah, she felt seen as a person. She had her needs met, and then a little more to say, you're a person and we care about you. That must have been wonderful to hear, and thank you for sharing that story with us, Cecilia. How about you, Dave? Has there been some positive outcomes of the work you've been involved in over the last 15 months?
Yeah, absolutely. Several examples. I'm trying to, decide which one to share, and I think the one that probably resonates the most with me is just the story of the Quad City COVID-19 Coalition. We had over 130 people from all sectors in the community. We had the Quad City Chamber, Visit Quad Cities, representatives from virtually every community in Scott and Rock Island County. We had the Community Foundation. We had all of our behavioral and mental health partners, all of our hospital systems. We had school districts. We had, oh my gosh, the list goes on and on, all the different types of organizations. I haven't checked in the last couple months, but when I checked a couple months ago, that group has met more than 80 times during the past 15 to 16 months. We started out meeting 3 times a week because there were just so many questions and so many unknowns, and just the amount of information that was shared, and it was all done virtually, which was new for everyone. And the information sharing, and we had another example is the Mississippi Valley Blood Center, would keep us informed on what the blood supply looked like in the community, which was very valuable. And we used that information and advocated, all these organizations really were representing the community and their little slice of the community. And then yet they were advocating for the entire Quad Cities. And so for me, it was just, and it continues to be, we're only meeting once a month now because we're in a much better place today. But I remember last November when the case counts were so high, and just the anxiety and the stress. But I think that group, they kept coming back, week after week. They kept wanting to find out what they could do to help the community, and everybody worked together. It was amazing, very heartwarming, and it just reminds me of why I love the Quad Cities, and I love the people and the partnerships and all the different organizations, and people are just, their hearts are so good. So
I love the scope of these examples from $25, a $25 gift card, and the way that made one person feel, to probably, at least 90, maybe 100 meetings by now of hundreds of people, and the way that makes you feel and the way that makes me feel, because it's people coming together for the benefit of the Quad Cities. All of those just really warm my heart. So you both are part of the eyes and ears of our community. You've been on the front lines of emergency management efforts and support for people throughout this crisis. Dave, I'll start with you, but then I'll come to Cecilia. What do you wish our community knew about the experience of people in our community over the last 15 months?
And some of these people may be aware of some of my thoughts on this. I think I want to make sure everyone knows how incredibly courageous our public health and healthcare practitioners are and have been throughout this, and how much effort went into this response. A lot of it was behind the scenes, and as we talked about, there's leaders from all over our community that worked tirelessly to get through this. I want, I wish people would know how incredibly lucky we are to have the dedicated network of nonprofits and social service organizations. It's amazing the work that Cecilia does and the work that the Community Foundation supports and Disaster Ready Quad Cities. We are so lucky to have that group of nonprofits and that network of individuals that work so tirelessly. The pandemic has and will continue to have a very profound impact on us and everyone. And that's the thing that's different about this disaster, is that it's virtually impacting everyone across the entire globe, financially, emotionally, socially, and I don't think we can fully understand that. And that's troubling, but yet I know that we will rise up. I know that the Quad Cities will rise up and we will overcome it. A lot of good things have come and will come, new relationships, new efforts, new programs, and it will make us stronger and more resilient. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. How about you, Cecilia? What do you wish people in our community knew about the experience that we've all had, or that some people have had over the last 15 months?
I mirror a lot of what Dave says as far as organizations go. The work that I do, I guess, is so system-based, and I think that oftentimes we forget that there's levels, right? So I hope that people know that from the end user, those folks who are needing that assistance and who are constantly seeking and looking for support, and not to be saved, right, but just to be heard and to be supported, is something that I really hope that people will take away from this, that people are really looking to be validated and to be helped, not saved. And from a community-wide or a social service agency perspective, what I hope people will see is when we started looking at essential services, right, and how it broke down, health and human services were there. And so I think that oftentimes when people look at health and human services, they don't see the broad spectrum of how health and human services respond. So it's not just the emergency crisis, it's the garnishing and leveraging of the dollars that come into the community, as well as responding to, the health, the hospital system, the education. All those things are all part of the health and human service sector. So I want people to know that we are always working together. We are, especially in the Quad Cities area, where we are really good at developing relationships, making sure that we're talking to one another and building that trust moving forward. And we're still working. So the initiatives look different now. And so the partners that I'm meeting with now are looking and focusing on different issues as moratorium lifted and things like that. So getting together rental assistance programs and things of that nature is what is important to us now, or sitting top of priority list. But that priority list shifts as needs are indicated. So the health and human service sector is always working, and we're always adapting, we're always flexible. And I hope that at the end of this pandemic, that people will remember just how collaborative we are, and be reminded that that work never stops.
It never stops. That's right. There's that critical infrastructure again, So in our last couple of minutes here, as we look to close, you both have referred to this. The pandemic's not over, and the experience, even as things open up, the experience of people who've been hit hard by the economic effects, by the social effects, by the health effects, and the educational effects is not over, and there's still more for us to do. And just because the fund has granted everything there, it doesn't mean there aren't more resources for us to marshal and put towards those efforts. I'll answer my own question first. When we're talking about the continued need and the way people are continuing to respond, you referenced this, Cecilia, that we're facing kind of eviction cliffs or eviction tsunamis potentially. in both of our local counties and probably across the country. And we have partners working to marshal resources to connect people with rent assistance, to make landlords whole, many of these small businesses that need to pay their mortgages too, and to keep hundreds of families and households perhaps from losing their homes in the next coming months. So we have people working on that. Would you, maybe Celia, you can go next, and then Dave, speak to the continued need and the way you and other partners are continuing to respond.
So sure. So yes, we know that people will still need those basic needs met. And again, as Kelly, as you referenced and I referenced earlier, as we see things kind of coming to moratoriums started coming to, and we know that is a major focus. But we also recognize that all of those things trickle down, right? So we're going to see an increase in need for someone to perhaps maintain their car insurance so that they can work, so that someone can still have the work shoes for the new job that they are going to have after being laid off for 15 months and things like that. So as we look at our partners and we look at our initiatives, we are going to be looking very broad spectrum as far as again working on those divides with those vulnerable communities that I think we focus on quite a great deal. We'll be looking at rental assistance. We will also be looking at those really, again, nominal, low dollars that that are requirements for people to remain sustainable, and to get back to work and get back to their jobs. So we'll be looking at all of those things.
Yeah. How about you, Dave? What do you see about the continued need and the way folks will continue to respond?
Well, and we've alluded to it, the pandemic isn't over, but we're at that sort of place where we begin to really focus our effort. We've been talking about recovery all throughout, and Kelly, you had the long-term recovery committee for disaster-ready Quad Cities. We've got that group, we've got our small group from the coalition trying to coordinate right now, and making sure that people are taking a step back and looking at the big picture. We've got resources coming into the community from the American Recovery Plan dollars, but we want to have those conversations. We want to coordinate to the extent possible so that we have the greatest, impact in our community. The pandemic's changed a lot, and we may not know some of the impacts, maybe for years to come, but I think if we don't work together, it's going to slow things down. If we do work together, then we're going to recover quicker. That's something we know based on other disasters. And we also know that disasters disproportionately affect those that are more vulnerable. So, as Cecilia said, it's very vital our nonprofit network is strong. We need to make sure that if we've, had impacts to businesses, that we're trying to make them healthy again, and talk about employment that sustains families. So I sort of compare the impacts anyway from COVID to sort of the farm crisis of the 70s and 80s. And here in the Quad Cities, we felt the impacts of that for decades, and the more we do today and in the next 18 months, that will help lessen that impact. So there's still work to be done. It's going to be a little bit more subtle and maybe a little bit more behind the scenes. It won't be on the front page of the Quad City Times, maybe from here on out, but it's nevertheless very important.
Yeah. So finally, if you can imagine the way you hope the Quad Cities will be, if we do all that, right? 3 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever. What are your hopes for the Quad Cities as a result of us working together to recover from the disaster? How about you, Cecilia?
So I hope that we remain connected and strong. I hope that we remain continuously reflective. And I hope through all of this, we are not only able to sustain and to regain, but that we take a more proactive approach to things, right? So we keep those partnerships alive and keep those plans in action. I think that's the best case scenario. We're not going to be able to prevent the next pandemic, but we can absolutely be well prepared to deal with it by working together.
Dave, how about you?
Well, I echo, some of what Cecilia says. I mean, I want to try to address as many of the gaps that the pandemic has exposed as we possibly can. And there are employment gaps. There are vulnerable populations that were disproportionately impacted. Ideally for me, I want to reduce those vulnerabilities, so that the next time we have an impact, whether it be a flood or whether it be a tornado or another pandemic, that we make ourselves more resilient in the process. That's my goal. There are certain things, again, I talked about sheltering and homelessness and affordable housing. Those are some things that our group's working on that already, but I'm hoping we can reduce that. As Cecilia said, let's get to a stronger place so that the next time the impacts aren't as difficult. We're probably not going to be able to achieve everything, on my list or on Cecilia's list, but if we can address some of it and reduce some of that vulnerability, I'll be happy in 3 years.
Well, good. Well, let's do that then. I just want to wrap up by saying thank you to both of you, not only for being here today to represent the many, many, many more people that have done all this great work over the last year and change, but also for that work that you've done and that you continue to do. Thank you both so much. I want to share a reminder with those watching that the Community Foundation will always have the Quad Cities Disaster Recovery Fund, and it can always accept gifts to prepare for the next disaster. Whatever that is, the people on this screen and many, many others will be prepared to deploy that in a way that makes the most sense for our community. I want to thank all the donors to that fund over the last 15 months. Thank you so much. And know that if you've contributed, or even if you're just curious, please check out the Quad City Community Foundation's website at qccommunityfoundation.org and get a report on the use of that over the last 15 months and the many impacts that it's had. Final thank you to the 80-some organizations that received grants from that and did and are doing amazing work to support the Quad Cities through this pandemic disaster. All right, well, thanks for sticking with us a little extra through your lunch hour, and we'll say goodbye for today. Thanks all so much.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks, Kelly.
And Cecilia.